The night the diner turned into a stage for everything Sable Hartley thought she understood about courage, the neon sign outside was half dead and sputtering in the damp summer air. The storm that had been promised all day had not yet arrived, but the humidity had thickened enough to feel like another person leaning against her, crowding her movements as she hustled coffee to truckers and plate lunches to night shift nurses. She liked the way the bell over the door jingled, the one thing in the whole place that sounded like hope instead of fatigue, and she told herself it meant people were still finding their way to her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Sable carried the tray with her left hand and steadied it with her right forearm, the muscle memory of 1,000 late nights at LMA's kitchen pulling her through a wave of dizziness she hadn't slept off. Coffee first, always. The rule was as reliable as gravity. She slid a mug to a paramedic whose eyelids fluttered like tired moths, then tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that the heat had wrung loose from her bun. At the far end of the counter, 3 men in matching concrete-dusted boots watched her the way men who want trouble watch the prettiest door in town. She felt it along her skin like grit caught under a contact lens. There was nothing loud in the air, not yet, but she knew the shapes of nights that go crooked. At 11:08, the bell jingled again. He cut a wide silhouette, helmet dangling from his fingers, denim vest scuffed and patched with a skull-winged rocker that even people who had never seen the inside of a clubhouse recognized. He was older than the boots at the counter and younger than the truckers, with a face that suggested both miles and restraint. His eyes did a sweep, taking in exits and angles, not predatory, Sable thought, just practiced, and then softened when he met her look. "Kitchen still going?" he asked. "We got a grill that's held together by habit and prayer," Sable said, her mouth curving before she told it to. "If that's good enough, you're golden." "It is," he said, setting the helmet on an empty stool. "Name's Rake." Of course it was, Sable thought, and then felt guilty for the thought because whatever else patched writers were in the world, there were also men who came in hungry, and she fed hungry people for a living. "I'm Sable. Sit anywhere that looks like it won't collapse. Tuna melt's honest, patty melt's better. Coffee's what keeps the lights on." Behind her, one of the boots, broad shoulders, sunburned neck, the particular swagger of someone whose friends confirm his worst instincts, let his voice rise like a warning flare. "Look at that, boys! We got ourselves a celebrity! Ain't you a little off your route, Angel?" The way he said the word made it a taunt. Rake looked at Sable instead of them, which she registered as both polite and strategic. "Patty melt," he said. "Add onions until your cook threatens to leave." "Hash browns or fries?" "Hash. I trust breakfast more than I trust potatoes pretending there's something better." He smiled, one corner of his mouth, controlled, like he knew smiles could be misunderstood. When she put the order in, she caught LMA's eye in the pass. The owner, cheeks flushed, gray coils tucked under his scarf, flicked a glance toward the boots. "You want Buck to come up from the grill?" She murmured. "Not yet," Sable said. "Not until there's a reason." She had learned to respect escalation the way you respect a creek after rain. Some days you can step across it. Some days it carries whole trees. She topped off Rake's coffee and laid down a napkin like a white flag. "Food's coming," Sable said. "Storm too." "Maybe it'll wash the air clean," he said. "Maybe it'll just remind it who's boss." The boots laughed too loud at nothing, loud enough for everyone in the diner to register the invitation to join the show. No one did. Night shift nurses drink their coffee like sacrament and mind their own business. Truckers know how quickly a detour costs you hours. Sable slid a plate to a young line cook at takeout, took the next ticket, and told herself not to pre-live disasters. The boots were locals. She'd seen them pour out of pickup trucks at the county fair, sawdust in their hair, the occasional Confederate flag decal peeling on a bumper like a scab that refused to heal. She knew their names without wanting to. Wade, Trevor, and the big one they called Breaker, which told her exactly what he'd learned to be proud of. They were the kind of men for whom Saturday fights out back of a bar weren't accidents but calendars. Breaker shoved off the counter and sauntered toward Rake's stool. "Hey, Patch, you and your friends running out of chain stores to scare?" Rake didn't look up. He added sugar to his coffee with a care that told Sable he was buying time. The spoon clinked like a metronome. "Just hungry, man." "Hungry's over in the county jail," Trevor said, tapping the helmet with 2 fingers like a kid daring himself to touch a wet paint sign. "You got the wrong county." Sable stepped between the hand and the helmet without thinking like a person, but thinking like a waitress who'd spent years absorbing the physics of a room and the ways small objects become starting pistols. "Nope," she said, steady. "Helmet's off limits. So's my coffee pot." She gave the last sentence the weight of a policy printed and posted. Breaker's eyes slid to her, then down her arms to the thin gold bracelet she never took off, then back to her face like he'd found something fragile he could scare himself on. "We're just talking," he said, spreading his hands in the international language of disingenuous innocence. "Then use words," Sable said. She let her voice stay low. "If your words don't work, that's not my problem, but your hands will be." For a moment, the diner remembered itself. Coffee, onions searing, the hum of the refrigerator bank. The nurses leaned forward, just enough to render aid if necessary, not enough to be called witnesses. Buck's spatula slowed on the grill, the way you slow when you hear the downbeat before someone drops it. Rake took a sip of coffee. "Hey, Sable," he said, like he was testing how the name felt in a different context. "How long you been here?" 11 years, she said. "Since the summer Mama's sugar spiked and somebody had to make sure her pills went down with food." She hadn't meant to say that much, but there it was. Information hung in the air like laundry you forgot someone could see. Breaker looked at his reflection in the steel napkin holder and adjusted a grin. "We're just civic-minded citizens making sure you and your guest understand our town's preferences." "Preferences," Sable repeated, and let the word pass through her as if she could strip it for parts. "We prefer tips. We prefer people using their inside voices. We prefer not to have to mop blood." "Ha, you mop better than you think." He wanted her to be afraid enough to waste herself. He knew that trick. Fear breaks rhythm. She kept moving. The next booth needed ranch. A corner of pie wanted a knife. Someone had asked for extra pickles, and you won't get them picked before the cosmos decides what it thinks of you. She delivered. She returned. She stood like a person whose job was to stand in the middle of other people's storms until the storms tired themselves out. The patty melt arrived at the pass, onions the color of dusk, cheese giving up its dignity for something better. Sable lifted it and felt the weight of a small, good thing. She set it in front of Rake. "Careful, it's hotter than you think." "Aren't we all?" he murmured, almost to himself. Breaker shifted his stance. "We don't need your kind clubbing up here," he said, voice dropping into the register menus when they want their words to turn into something else. Sable heard the sentence and heard its long shadow. "We don't need your kind" was a multi-tool, sharpened on different days for different people. She felt the heat in her neck rise and met it with a breath. "What kind do you need?" she asked, genuinely curious. Trevor laughed, short and mean. "Ha, that a trick question?" "What if I'm not tricking you?" She tilted her head. "What if I'm asking you to risk saying what you think out loud so you can hear yourself?" That was when Breaker made the mistake. Small, quick, wrists faster than consequences. He reached for the helmet again, more than a tap, and the chin strap caught his knuckles. In the same breath, Rake's hand left the coffee and landed on the helmet, a block so smooth Sable almost missed it. "Don't," Rake said. Not loud. Final. The room shrunk and grew teeth. A calm came over Sable she recognized from emergency rooms and alleys behind bars. This is where time slows enough to offer choices. She could yell. She could reach under the counter for the bat LMA kept for possums and men who acted like them. She could let the men define things she would spend weeks cleaning. Instead, she moved her body so the line between Rake and the boots ran through her. "Gentlemen, I'm going to say this once and let it be enough. We serve everybody who is paying and peaceful. That's the rule. Cross the rule and I call Sheriff Darden, who is tired, underfunded, and in no mood to fill out forms because somebody decided to make their night louder than it needed to be." She met each man's eyes and didn't skip. "Eat or leave. Those are the options." Breaker leaned in until she could smell peppermint and cheap bourbon like they'd been fighting for real estate. "You think they'll show up for you? You think your pretty decisions make you bulletproof?" The words found an old bruise in Sable. The memory of a high school fight she hadn't started and did finish. The time she'd had to stand between her kid brother and a boy who wanted to be a man too fast. The night she walked a nurse to her car with keys clenched between knuckles. She didn't believe in bulletproof. She believed in doing the mathematics of a minute and choosing the sum she could live with. "You're leaking in security," she said quietly. "Get a napkin." It would have escalated right there if Ella May hadn't stepped from the pass with the heavy posture of a matriarch who had built this place with her wrists and wouldn't see it broken by men with half her character, twice her cholesterol. "Out," she said, chin lifting a fraction that meant acres, "or I call your mamas and tell them how you behave when they ain't lookin'." Wade laughed again because he didn't know how to do anything else in a corner. Trevor rolled his shoulders like a dog shaking off water that will still be in his fur. Breaker held Sable's look until he decided the cost of staying wasn't worth the story he'd get to tell about leaving. He backed up, hands raised like a performance of surrender, and the boots drifted toward the door with the slow rhythm of people who want credit for not doing something they're too clever to do in public. The bell jingled as they left. The diner breathed. Rake exhaled. Tension unwound from his shoulders like a rope that had decided not to pull. "The onions are perfect," he said. Laughed because it was the third best thing he could have said, and the first two were too personal. "Welcome to Ella May's, where the onions try to make up for everything else." They ate the next minutes like a gift. Rake took his food in steady, appreciative bites. Sable poured coffee, rang up a to-go order, delivered pie to a couple who had been married through 3 state lines and 1 deployment. The storm stayed north, gossiping, and sent only a few fat drops to test the awnings. When the check came, Rake paid in cash and left 30% like he knew exactly what her rent looked like. He set the helmet on his head with the deliberate grace of someone who understood both physics and ritual. "You aren't afraid," he said, not a question. "Of course I was," she said, because truth is a thing she learned to give generously. "I just didn't feed it." He studied her the way you study maps when you're too tired to trust the signs. "You ever need anything," he said, "you call." He slid a card across the counter, plain, unstamped, handwritten number, the name Rake in block letters like a promise. "We look out for the ones who look out." "Go on," she said, though she tucked the card into the watch pocket of her jeans like a talisman. The bell jingled. The bite coughed to life, then found its rumor. Rake pulled away into the wet glass dark, and Sable went back to work because work was what you do when the adrenaline leaves and the floor still needs mopping. By midnight, the diner had slipped into that quiet that isn't really about sound. It's about the way the world holds its breath between shifts. Sable rolled silverware, counted receipts, wiped a counter that had known more confessions than most pews. Ella May sent Buck home early to catch his daughter's fever as it broke. The nurses left a thank you note under their cups written in a tidy script that made Sable think of precision and mercy. She should have gone home then. She should have walked the 4 blocks to her apartment, climbed the 2 flights, and fallen onto the couch next to a laundry basket that had perfected the art of being almost done. But there were ketchup bottles to refill, and a refrigerator gasket to jiggle, and a phone call to return from her sister in Baton Rouge who had a way of needing and not needing at the same time. At 12:47, while she scraped plates and let her thoughts soften, the phone on the wall buzzed, a call from the outside line, not the internal ring Ella May used. Sable smacked it with her elbow. "Ella May's," she said, and wiped a plate with the other hand, a habit of split focus she'd made art. The voice that came through sounded like a person trying on somebody else's throat. "You think you did something tonight?" it said. Sable didn't answer right away. She had learned it was a gift to give silence to people who wanted noise. The voice filled it like a man hurrying into a room he didn't pay rent on. "You should watch your mouth, girl. Friends of ours don't forget public disrespect." The word girl slid across her skin and woke up a temper she had domesticated through effort. She kept it on its leash. "You have the wrong number," she said, and hung up. She wrote the time down. Old habit. If you ever needed to tell a story to a deputy or a claims adjuster, you brought times and names and didn't trust your adrenaline to keep track for you. At 1:06, she turned the lights over the booths to their lowest and said a soft goodnight to the coffee machine like it would miss her. She took the trash out back because it had to go somewhere and because there's a dignity in doing the unglamorous thing right. The alley behind the diner was a geography of leaks and graffiti, a place where people had carved their lovers' names into cinder block, as if permanence could be bullied into existing. She hated how the dumpsters always smelled like hot pennies and bread. She rolled the lid back and heaved the bag in and counted the breaths it took to not think about the phone call. That was when she heard it, the soft scrape of rubber against gravel. Not a footstep, something wheeled. She turned and saw two bicycles leaned into the shadow of the old apple crate that Buck used as a makeshift step when the back door swelled in summer. Teenagers. She could tell by the cheap pegs on the back wheels and the way silence tried to make them smaller. "Hey," she said gently, not wanting to scare anyone who had already decided the world didn't want them. "Kitchen's closed, but if you're hungry, I can see about pie." A boy stepped forward into the sadness of the security light. He was 14, and the way a deer was a yearling, knees he hadn't grown into, a stare that tested the perimeter and looked for an open gate. The other boy hung back, hood up, baseball cap under it like he didn't want the hat to be alone. "We don't need pie," the first said. "We were making sure you got inside safe." It took her a second to understand the sentence. She tipped her head. "Do I know you?" "You know my aunt," he said. "Nurse Keisha? She said you give her extra napkins when she forgets to ask." Sable's heart made a sound she wouldn't admit to in the daylight. "I do," she said. "Your aunt's good people." He nodded solemnly, like he'd been expecting her to pass a test she hadn't been told she was taking. "She told us men might be around who don't like rules. We thought maybe we could do something. I got a phone if you need." He held it up like a lantern. Sable swallowed the tenderness in her throat and refused to let tears make a spectacle of themselves. "You two head home," she said. "The world is heavy enough without you trying to carry me inside it." They left, wheels whispering like a secret. Sable locked the back door and finished closing. She walked home under streetlights that flickered like they had opinions. Sleep came in short rooms. She dreamed of onions sweating in stovetop pans, of a helmet rolling in slow motion, of a voice on the phone becoming a shape that couldn't fit through thresholds because its shoulders were made of other people's fear. She woke to rain at 7:12. It had arrived late, but when it committed like a preacher. The sound of it on the building's flat roof made everything she owned feel cleaner. She made coffee in the chipped blue kettle her mother loved and spooned honey into it, because honey makes mornings feel like someone meant well. Her phone hummed, a text from Ella May. "Come early if you can. Bring your patience." She answered with a heart and put her hair up and caught her reflection in the mirror like a stranger she wanted to be kind to. On the walk to the diner, the rain backed off to a diamond mist. The town looked reset. Curbs rinsed, storefronts winking through water-spotted glass. A white SUV rolled slowly past with county plates. She watched it the way you watch someone watch you. She turned the corner onto Maple, where the diner sat like it had grown from the sidewalk, and then she stopped, because there was sound where there had never been sound before this early. A far rolling thunder that wasn't weather, the kind of thunder whose rhythm is made of pistons and intention. At first, she thought it was her imagination paying her back for the night. Then she saw the first headlight slice through the mist, then 4, then 12. Then the street bloomed with chrome and leather and rain-freckled faces. Bikes in 2s and 3s, riding staggered, the way people who love each other ride when they trust each other's reflexes with parts of their lives you can't replace. Sable stood on the sidewalk with her keys in her hand and her mouth partway open. The air filled with the smell of gas and rain and a chemical she recognized as relief. Helmets lifted, boots swung down, hands clapped shoulders. She counted because counting made it smaller. 12, 26, 39, 56. By the time her brain accepted that numbers didn't protect her from scale, Maple Avenue had become a river of motorcycles idling nose to tail, turn signals blinking like a swarm of calm fireflies. Rake was at the front, helmet under his arm, rain beating on his eyelashes. He lifted a hand, 100 hands lifted back, a flock of human acknowledgement. He took 3 steps to her and held out a bag that was too clean to be from any kitchen he'd ever eaten in. "You open yet?" he asked. "Are we about to feed the county fair?" Sable said, voice steady because the rest of her was not. "We're about to feed some gratitude," he said. "We heard there was a woman who stood up between men and the worst versions of themselves, and we thought maybe she shouldn't stand alone today." He turned. The line of bikes stretched past the barber shop, past the pawn shop, disappearing into the mist. People on porches filmed with their phones. A man who owned a hardware store gaped like a child seeing his first train. Across the street, Sheriff Darden pulled up and stayed in his car with his hands at 10 and 2, a professional reading a weather map. Ella May appeared at Sable's shoulder like an invocation. "If we stop making biscuits, I'm resigning." She then turned on her heel and went to light the ovens. Sable unlocked the door. The bell jingled and did its best. Inside, the diner brightened the way a mind does when it suddenly understands a thing's opposite. Rake held the door for people whose vests carried patches that meant history and somehow community. A woman with a streak of white in her hair set a stack of $20 bills on the counter like starter logs. A man whose beer had seen more continents than Sable had seen counties bent to tie a child's shoe. They came in waves and Sable and Ella May surfed them. Buck showed up with his daughter on his hip and rolled his sleeves before his hat dried. The espresso machine that no one trusted came alive out of fear of embarrassment and poured shots like it had finally believed in its destiny. Pans hit burners, orders hung from the metal rail like flags at a race. Laughter built a new ceiling, just high enough to keep the old clouds out. Tension threaded through it, though, an embroidery you could feel if you ran your fingers across the day. Sheriff Darden parked and entered with his hat in his hand, a man who didn't want to break anything that was somehow working. He walked to Sable at the pass and kept his voice low. "You do it all right?"
"I'm feeding people," she said. "It's the closest thing to religion I can afford." "You get a call last night?" Darden asked. His eyes flicked to the camera above the door and back to her face without lingering. "I did," she said. "Block number. You tell me if it happens again." He slipped a card from his pocket and put it where Rake's had been. 2 cards in one morning. She resisted the urge to make a joke about men believing in business cards the way some folks believed in St. Christopher medals. It was almost beautiful, the choreography that sprang from nowhere. Patched riders bussing tables, a nurse walking in on her day off with a bag of oranges like vitamin C could fortify courage, the hardware store owner carrying in extra chairs as if seating was an act of defiance against empty rooms. Sable moved through it with muscle she'd forgotten she had, taking inventory of smiles the way she'd take inventory of coffee filters. She didn't see Breaker until he was already seated. He had taken a table near the back under the baseball pennant signed by someone who'd played 2 years in the minors and still called the diner when he missed home. Wade and Trevor flanked him, their hands too still for people who claimed indifference. Breaker's eyes were wrong, not wild, but receptive, like they were built to collect and save. He watched the vests, the patches, the way Rake moved through the room with authority that came from something more durable than volume. Sable wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, because that's what you do when conflict sits in your section. "Morning," she said. "You boys ready to practice indoor voices?" Wade looked at the table, at the napkin dispenser, anywhere but at her. Trevor ran a finger along the serrated edge of the menu like he wanted to see it cut him. Breaker smiled and put his fingertips together. "We're here for the show," he said. "There's no show," Sable said. "There's breakfast." "Everything's a show if you know where to sit," Breaker said, glancing at the door. More bikes. The room kept filling. Rake noticed at the same time she did, his expression tightening. He drifted toward the back of the diner in a way that looked like coincidence, carrying 2 plates like a busboy who happened to be a storm. Breaker leaned forward. "You're brave, Sable Hartley," he said, and something in the way he said brave made it an accusation. maybe braver than you can afford. Sable felt the slow, clean anger that comes when a person tries to borrow your name to buy something you don't sell. "You ordering," she said, "or are we just wasting each other's weather?" He set the menu down, palms flat. "We'll take 3 coffees, and a promise you'll remember that last night was a courtesy." Rake's plates landed at the next table with a clack that made a bell sound in Sable's head. He looked at Breaker with all the warmth of a locked door. "Man, if you came here for theater, you picked the wrong matinee," he said, voice smooth as sanded oak. "We came to eat and to make sure she knows who writes the endings around here." Rake's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Endings get argued," he said. "We're more interested in beginnings." Sable put 3 cups on the table and poured coffee like it was a sacrament she didn't trust them with. "Cream and sugar?" she asked. "Black," he said, "like your sense of humor." He lifted the cup just enough to pretend gratitude and then set it down like he'd measured gravity and found it arrogant. The next hour was a lesson in coexistence under pressure. The patched riders ate and smiled and left tips that made Sable blink. The locals watched from the edges of their comfort. Sheriff Darden posted a deputy at the door who looked young enough to be trying on courage. Rain turned to light, to sun. A rainbow would have been too much, Sable thought, and almost laughed at the absurdity of even considering one. Then the power flickered. It was the briefest of hiccups. Lights dimmed, the refrigerator compressors paused, the old radio on the shelf cut off half a syllable of Otis Redding and had to find itself again. People laughed nervously, the way you do when you want to keep the universe casual. The second flicker was longer. The third was a soft blink in the sigh, and then the ovens went quiet and the room sounded like a heart before a run. Buck swore in the kitchen. Ella May said a prayer she kept in her apron for equipment that had made promises and wanted release. Sable looked out the front window and saw it all at once, like a magic eye coming into focus. The power lines that ran behind the diner, the alley where the dumpster sat, the pale thread of smoke that shouldn't be there at all. She didn't think, she moved. Rake was 2 steps behind her and 3 steps beside her. Sheriff Darden's deputy called something into his shoulder mic that sounded like a request and a hope. The door banged the bell so hard it whined. The alley smelled like melted plastic and threat. At the base of the pole where the lines entered the building, someone had tied a bundle of rags soaked with something mean, set alight, and tucked into the lip of the junction box. Fire is a language. Sable spoke enough to know this one was saying hello to bigger words. "Water," Rake said. "Inside," Sable said, and started to run because the mop sink was 10 steps and 1,000,000 miles away. "Stop," Breaker's voice came from behind them. Wrong in the alley's light, wrong because he was outside now, wrong because his eyes had stopped collecting and started projecting. "You put that out, you'll think you won." Sable's hand closed on the back door handle. It was hot enough to warn, but not yet hot enough to burn. She turned it and felt the whole diner behind her inhale. She could feel them. People do that even if the door is between you. The handle resisted. Someone on the inside had thrown the deadbolt when they saw the flicker and heard the second flicker and believed in locks the way a person believes in rain. She pounded with her fist. "Open!" she yelled, the word tearing out of her like fabric. The latch turned, and the door flew inward, Buck ducking his shoulder beneath the jamb like a fullback. Sable slid past him, grabbed the orange extinguisher from its cradle, yanked the pin, and pressed the lever. The hiss was a hard winter laid over summer. White powder swallowed the orange tongues, smothered the soaked rags, turned the alley into a chalked crime scene. Rake stood between the flame and the oxygen with his jacket as a shield, boots planted as if the concrete trusted him. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Sheriff Darden arrived in the alley with his hat off and his jaw set, the deputy on his radio stringing words together into a net. Sable kept the lever down until the hiss turned to a wheeze, and the last curl of smoke died like a sentence that ran out of verbs. Rake took the empty canister from her trembling hands and set it gently on the step like a man lowering a sleeping child. Darden crouched near the junction box without touching it. "Someone wanted you scared," he said. "Wanted me closed," Sable said, chest still heaving. She looked at Breaker. He looked like a Sunday suit that had decided to learn how to pick locks. His smile had gone expensive and small. "Anyone see who lit it?" Darden asked. Camera on the back, Eve, LMA called from the doorway, voice steady, because someone had to be. Been begging the budget for a better angle, but it's got something. Darden nodded. We'll pull the video. Nobody touch this mess. Deputy, tape it. He stood and turned to Breaker. You gentlemen here to eat or obstruct? Free country, Breaker said mildly. Free counties have jails, Darden replied, equally mild. The alley held its breath while the deputy strung yellow tape like a warning ribbon on a package nobody wanted. Sable felt the adrenaline settle into her limbs with the heavy kindness of a quilt. The riders in the diner had gone quiet in the way crowds go quiet when something true steps into the room. Rake's eyes met hers, not in question, but in calibration. Are you still you? She nodded once. He nodded back. They went inside, the power, as if chastened by attention, steadied. Buck checked the ovens, coaxed the pilot lights like stubborn old dogs. The line of tickets had sagged but not snapped. Sable washed her hands in water that had never felt more like mercy and went back to pouring coffee as if that were the most radical thing a person could do. The breakfast rush resumed, but with a different electricity. People held themselves like witnesses. Tips multiplied not just in cash but in sentences. Proud of you. With you. Whatever you need. Someone, in a denim vest patched with the memory of an old war, started a list on a legal pad. Repairs, volunteers, cash on bar. Names fell into columns like rain into a barrel. By noon, the mist had burned off and the street outside shimmered with chrome. People kept arriving, not just patch riders. There were teachers who graded papers at the counter for years, a librarian carrying a box of children's books like a talisman against ignorance, the pastor from the church that had once frowned at Ella Mae's jukebox but had eaten her pie in emergencies. A man Sable only knew as the careful hands that tuned pianos, wheeled in an upright from a pickup with two teenagers and set it by the front window. He ran his fingers once over the keys, and the diner found itself standing up a little straighter. News vans appeared like mushrooms after rain. Darden kept them on the far side of the street with a look that said, not now. But they filmed anyway. Long shots of bikes lined down Maple, the hand-lettered sign someone taped to the door, be kind or be somewhere else. Sable moved like a dancer who had memorized the steps long ago and was finally hearing the right music. She didn't think about the phone call. She didn't think about the bundle of rags. She thought about plates, names, onions, the temperature of grief and grease. Every few minutes, some stranger or friend tried to stop her and say gratitude like a pledge. She accepted it with a nod because the true thanks she wanted was simple. No one else gets hurt today. Breaker and his friends finished their coffee without incident and left with the same performative slowness they'd used the night before. Their empty cups sat like punctuation. Darden watched them go, eyes narrowing as if he were measuring their silhouettes for future paperwork. By 3, the crowd outside had spilled into a block party that no one had planned but everyone needed. Someone rolled a grill onto the sidewalk and started hot dogs that smelled like baseball games in childhood summers, as if innocence could be borrowed for an afternoon. A woman in a freight company polo set up a folding table and labeled bins with the marker, donations, receipts, repairs. A patch rider with a gentle face taught 2 kids how to fold napkins into swans. Around 4, Sable's phone buzzed again from the shelf by the register. The number was blocked. She didn't have the luxury of choosing not to answer. Ella Mae's, she said, voice level. This ain't over. The voice had that same borrowed throat quality. You should have learned from the fire. I did. I learned that you're not brave enough to sign your own name. She ended the call, wrote down the time, and slid the note to Darden like a student passing a test she hoped was graded on effort. He nodded, thumbed a text, and a few minutes later the deputy hung a new camera on the awning, loaned from a church, Darden said. The town's patchwork of protections was foolish and holy and exactly right. Evening brought thunderclouds and a light that made everything look like it belonged in a photograph. The riders eased their bikes into tighter lines, made room for the after-work crowd, and started organizing themselves with the discipline of people who've moved as a unit under pressure. Rake climbed onto the step with the apple crate and raised a hand. The engines idled down as if the machines themselves were listening. "We came to eat," he said, voice carrying without aggression. "We stayed to make sure the woman who fed us didn't have to carry today alone. Nobody's here to start anything. Nobody's here to be a hero. We'll leave this place better than we found it, and we'll be 3 counties away before anybody can make a story out of something we didn't do." He looked at the cameras, at Darden, at Sable. "We know how stories work." A low hum of assent moved through leather and denim. Sable felt something in her chest loosen, the part that had been clenched against cartoon versions of men she had not met. These men knew their own myth and had learned to live past it. As dusk fell, the piano man started "Stand By Me," and voices rose like a promise you didn't have to sign to believe. Sable leaned for a minute against the cooler and let the harmonies blow through the day's smoke. LMA pressed a glass of water into her hand, the kind of sacrament you can drink. "Go home for 2 hours," LMA said, the voice of command that had raised Sable as much as anyone's long-absent father. "Shower, put on that shirt you never wear because you say it looks too nice for this place. Be back by 9, we'll close at midnight and call it a win." "Can you spare me?" "I can spare you so you come back for the rest of your life." Sable obeyed. The walk home felt like leaving a campfire in good hands. She showered, stared at the shirt, laughed at herself, put it on. The mirror showed a woman whose eyes were a little swollen and whose shoulders were learning a new shape for the word held. When she returned, the streetlights had come up, and Maple Avenue looked like a set from a movie where the lesson is that community is not a noun but a verb. Bikes still lined the block. The piano had migrated outside. Kids drew with chalk on the sidewalk around words like safe and home. Someone had hung string lights from the awning to the signpost. It looked temporary and like it should have always been. Sable was 3 steps from the door when she saw Breaker's truck slide slow down the cross street. It paused at the light, idled, and then turned into the alley, its taillights winking like a dare. She didn't run. She walked quickly, checking with a glance that Darden saw it too. He did. One finger pointed. The deputy peeled off. Rake slipped into the alley alongside Sable, not as a shadow, but as a person taking a lane in a procession. The alley was darker now, the security light haloed by bugs that believed themselves to be stars. The charred rag still sat under tape like a bad idea stuck in amber. Breaker's truck idled at the far end, red glow painting the cinder block. Wade stood in the bed, peering over the cab. Trevor smoked, the ember bobbing like a tiny heart. "You're late to the party," Sable said. Calm. She made her voice a choice. "Kitchen closes at midnight." Breaker killed the engine. The sudden quiet made the insects sound like static. He hopped from the cab, hands out, palms empty. "We're just checking the wiring," he said, looking at the taped-off junction box like a man admiring his own handwriting. "Funny, the county contracts those checks," Rake said. Darden's patrol car eased into the alley mouth, lights off. He walked down the center like a man on a balance beam. "Evening, fellas," he said. "I need you to turn around, get in your truck, and enjoy the parts of the night that don't include my signature." Breaker smiled without teeth. "You got a warrant for my time?" "I got suspicion enough to keep my boots clean. Let's not upgrade it." Trevor flicked his cigarette toward the taped box. It arced like a small, practiced meteor and died on damp concrete. "Oops," he said. Sable felt something in her that had been patient and holy and careful decide to be sharp. "Pick it up," she said. Trevor laughed. "What are you, the alley police?" "Tonight, I'm the person who built a day you're trying to ruin. Pick it up." She took a step forward, not in threat, but in insistence. Rake said nothing. He shifted his weight just enough to be where he needed to be if the physics of the alley changed. Trevor stooped, pinched the cigarette, hissed as it bit him, and placed it dramatically into a soda can on the truck's bumper. Sable nodded. "Good," she said. "You're teachable." A door opened at the diner. 2 riders, the woman with the white streak and a tall man with quiet eyes, paused in the back doorway. They didn't crowd the alley, they just stood where they could see. Breaker took in the geometry, the patrol car at one mouth, the riders at the other, the yellow tape like a line drawn between the person he thought he was and the person he wanted to be. He lifted his eyes to Sable's. "You don't get to win," he said, and the sentence sounded less like a threat than a confession.
Winning's not my verb, feeding is.
He took one slow step to the tape and then another, as if daring the law to become itself. Darden's hand lowered to his belt, not to his weapon, but to his radio. "Don't," Darden said softly. Breaker looked at Rake, and the alley held two kinds of manhood up to the light and asked them to examine themselves. Rake didn't move. He didn't offer violence or retreat. He offered presence, like a wall that isn't there to trap you, only to keep the inside safe. Breaker flinched first. He laughed, a ragged sound that owed more to childhood than to swagger, and backed away. "This ain't over," he said again, but the words had less oxygen. He and his crew climbed into the truck. The engine coughed. The tail lights winked their dare again and disappeared. Darden exhaled. "I'm getting you a temporary patrol for the night," he said, "and a better lock on that back door." Sable nodded. "We'll keep feeding them," she said, "whoever them is." The night settled into a rhythm that felt like a town writing a new chapter together. The piano man played standards, and then, after a shy minute, "What a Wonderful World," and the riders hummed the horn lines like men who kept big feelings in acceptable boxes. Buck sent out plates that shouldn't have been possible with the small crew he had. Sable caught his eye and pantomimed a trophy. He grinned and flipped a pancake in a way that made a child clap. Just before midnight, a minivan with county plates pulled up, and 4 women from the hospital's night shift tumbled out in scrubs and laughter. "We clocked out and came to clock back in here," one said. "Put us where you need us." Sable handed them aprons, and they began wiping down tables with the ruthless compassion of people who cleaned up after blood. At 12:03, Sable flipped the sign to "Closed," but left the door unlocked for stragglers. Rake leaned on the counter, exhausted in the way that made rest sacred. "You did it," he said simply. "We did something," she said. Her hands found the edge of the laminate and held on like it could tell her a story back. Darden stepped inside, hat in his hand. He said, "We pulled the camera." His eyes flicked to Rake, to LMA, to Sable. "It's good footage. We'll be making some visits in the morning." "Good," Sable said. The word was a small boat she pushed into a river that had tried to swallow her. The riders began to peel away, engines thumping goodnight. They left the street cleaner than they found it, trash bags tied and stacked by the curb like gifts. A boy who had watched all night from the hardware store's stoop swept chalk dust into a neat pile, then used his shoe to redraw the word "safe" where feet had smudged it. Rake was last. He stood by the door like a bouncer for a club where the currency is decency. "We'll be back," he said. "Not like this," he gestured at the river of bikes, "unless you ask, but we'll be around." Sable touched the edge of his card in her pocket. She said, "I know. Thank you." He hesitated, then said, "You sure you're not afraid?" She said, "I'm sure I am," and smiled. "I just keep choosing the part of me that isn't." He nodded like he'd been paid. The bell gave its last tired jingle as he stepped into night. The cleanup took an hour and the kind of silence that feels like prayer. Ella May counted the cash aloud with a voice that was half astonishment, half arithmetic. They'd pay for repairs and put some in a jar labeled "Rainy Year." Buck shut down the grill with the care of a man laying a friend down to sleep. At 12:22, Sable stepped into the alley for breath. The air tasted like wet concrete and something new. She could see stars between the warehouse roofs where the clouds had torn. She put her hands on her knees and let herself be tired. Her phone buzzed once more. She almost didn't look. She did. A still image filled the screen, the backdoor camera's view from an hour earlier. A face half-shadowed under a ball cap, eyes lit by the brief flare of a match, the bundle of rags pressed lovingly into the junction box's lip. Breaker. The deputy had texted it ahead of morning warrants with one line of caption, "Got him." Sable laughed out loud then, a short, broken sound that healed as it left her.
Not because justice was done. Justice has more chapters than a diner has coffee filters, but because the story was leaving her body, the way smoke leaves when a door is opened.
She went home at 2:10. The world was quieter, but not empty. She slept without dreams until the sun poured the cheap apartment gold. Morning arrived with the smell of rain, baked off asphalt. Sable put on her shoes and felt the day like a coin in her mouth. She met Darden at the diner. There were questions and forms and a technician who talked gently to the junction box, as if it might confess. There were 2 vans from networks Sable didn't watch. LMA said no to interviews with a graciousness that felt like love. Around 10, a group of riders returned unannounced with ladders and a man who carried a toolbox like a violin case. Electrician, he said. Licensed, on the house. They replaced the junction box, ran a new weatherproofed conduit, mounted a brighter light that made the alley look less like a dare. A woman from the print shop arrived with a banner she'd made at dawn. "You are safe here." Sable tied it between the awning posts with hands that had steadied 1,000 plates and were now allowed to shake. By noon, life remembered itself. Mac delivered bread, late and sheepish. The piano man tuned to the upright, then played "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," just loud enough to make a baby laugh. The nurses sent flowers. The hardware store owner, having found something to fix in himself, replaced the door closer for free. Darden texted, "In custody, arson, no bail today." Sable read it and sat in the booth under the baseball pennant and let herself breathe as if someone had just opened a window in a house that had forgotten outside. Her sister from Baton Rouge called between classes. "You on the news?" she demanded, delighted and worried. "Lord, I hope not in a way that needs cousins." "You sounded strong," her sister said. "Mama would be proud." "She'd fuss that I didn't wear lipstick," Sable said, and they both laughed a laugh only daughters know how to make. Afternoon eased. The town's eyebrows floated back down from their hairlines. The riders stopped by in 2s to eat like regular people. Rake texted a photo of a quiet road and a sky that didn't look like it wanted trouble, with the caption, "Still around." Sable didn't reply with words. She sent a picture of the banner and the line, "So are we." Toward dusk, a boy hovered in the doorway, then slipped inside. The yearling who had watched from the bicycles. He moved like a person entering a church for the first time alone. "Hey," Sable said softly, "we got pie." He nodded. Keisha said to tell you she cried at work and it was embarrassing." He offered it like a receipt. Sable smiled. "Tell her everyone's getting a pass for public feelings this week." He hesitated, then blurted, "I want to work here when I'm old enough." "Come wash dishes twice a week after school, and we'll see who quits first," she said. He grinned like an application had been accepted. "I'm good at not dropping things." "We'll test that theory," she said. Night fell. The banner moved in a breeze that pretended to be prophetic. A couple from 3 towns over came in because they'd seen something on their phones that looked like the place they'd been missing all along. Sable taught a new hire where the spoons went, told him he'd learn the rest from the way the room breathed. At closing, LMA poured 2 glasses of the good, sweet tea she'd kept hidden and handed one to Sable. "You did today," she said. "So did you," Sable replied. "So did they." LMA tilted her head toward the door, where a scuffed weather jacket hung as if it had earned a rest. They stood in companionable silence in a room that had been threatened and had held. The neon sign sputtered, then glowed steady for a rare minute, like even old things can decide to be constant. On her walk home, Sable passed the alley and paused. The new light spilled gold onto the concrete. The yellow tape was gone. She rested her fingertips on the cool new conduit. "Thank you," she said to no one and to everyone. When she reached her building, a neighbor leaned from a window. "We saw the bikes," he said, grinning. "Sounded like a parade where the floats are loud on purpose." "It was a line of thank yous," Sable said. The loud was the point. In bed, she lay on her back and stared at the ceiling where shadows made their own small cities. She felt fear somewhere under the bed like a cat, present but not controlling the room.
She felt gratitude in her ribs. She felt tired in a way that promised sleep would be kind. In the days that followed, the diner settled into a new normal that kept the old normal's soul. Breaker's arrest made the paper. His mugshot looked less like a legend and more like a man who'd chosen poorly too many times. Wade and Trevor disappeared like snow into a warmer month. Darden looked 10 years older and 5 pounds lighter, but stood a little taller when he came in for chili. Riders came back not as a spectacle, but as friends who wanted eggs and a quiet corner. Rake stopped by sometimes at odd hours and sat at the counter without armor. They talked about nothing important and everything ordinary. How far a person can ride before they stop being the person who left. Whether onions are happier when they sweat slow. He never made promises, and Sable never asked for any. It was enough that the card in her pocket meant what it said. One rain-sparkle evening, a local reporter, more nervous than predatory, asked Sable if she had a message for anyone watching. She thought about slogans, about bravery, about the temptation to be a speech when what people need is a meal. "Feed the ones in front of you," she said finally, "and don't let the loudest people write your endings." The story moved past the town, the way stories do when they sneak something useful into their carry-ons. People drove in to buy pie who had no business in this county. Some left notes on napkins that made Sable cry in the walk-in and then laugh at herself for crying in a room with lettuce. On a Sunday afternoon, the electrician returned with his daughter to show her the conduit he'd installed. He lifted her up and she touched it with reverence like it was a relic. "This keeps people safe," he told her. "So do people," Sable said. She wasn't naive. Fear wrote postcards sometimes, a stranger glaring too long in the parking lot, a rumor that Breaker's cousin wanted to try for a different ending. But fear didn't get to pick the music anymore. Music belonged to the piano man and to the bell and to the laughter that hadn't learned to be quiet. One night, after closing, Rake leaned over the counter and said, almost shy, "You ever been on a bike?" "Once. My cousin in college," I screamed. I didn't like giving the air that much access to my teeth. He laughed, finally free and full. "We go slow. We can do dignified." "Dignified I can do," she said. "Screaming I'll save for the fryer when it pops." They went out into a night that wasn't threatening anything. He handed her a spare helmet with a visor that made the world look like a softer decision. She swung a leg over and sat with both feet deliberate on the pegs. He started the engine, and the vibration felt like a heartbeat under her bones. They rolled down Maple, past the Banner, past the hardware store, past the courthouse where judgment had been taught to walk more carefully, and out onto a road that remembered how to be empty. They didn't go far. They didn't need to. Sometimes distance is vanity. The ride was steady and close and felt like being a note in a chord that had been waiting for you. Sable didn't scream. She laughed once, a surprised bell. They parked where the road widened into a view. The town lay below like a handful of necklaces someone had forgotten to put away. Rake cut the engine, and the night grew so quiet they could hear a dog bark 2 streets over, a train a county away. "Thank you," Sable said, and didn't know if she meant the ride, the day, or the fact of the man next to her not trying to make her life into something she hadn't chosen. He nodded. "Thank you," he said back, and didn't specify either. On the ride home, they passed a church marquee that read in earnest plastic letters, "Be the reason someone believes in good." Sable thought of onions and fire extinguishers and back doors that opened at the right time,
and the way a town had argued with fear and refused to lose the argument. The diner slept while they parked. The bell was still. The neon tried one more sputter, and then, as if encouraged by the small engines of human persistence, glowed steady. She pressed her palm to the cool glass of the front window and felt the hum of everything that stays when you do the work. She locked up. She walked home. She lay in bed and gave morning permission to come. It did. Reliable as coffee. The day brought its errands and its ordinariness and the quiet heroism of not quitting. She moved through it with a light inside her that had learned not to apologize for being seen. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.